This is TJ Jones, the host of the State of the Saints podcast, and the State of the Saints podcast is brought to you by Manscaped.com. Over 2 million men worldwide choose Manscaped for all their below-the-waist needs. For those that love the Lawnmower 3.0, well, I got news for you. The Manscaped engineering team has confirmed that they have successfully created the Lawnmower 4.0. The Lawnmower 4.0 gives you the ability to turn the 4000K LED spotlight on and off when needed for a more precise shave. The new trimmer even allows you to customize your trim all through additional guards lengths, sizes 1 through 4. And looks-wise, it's sleek with a two-tone matte and gloss finish, even features a hot foil stamp, black chrome Manscaped logo. Show your mower off loud and proud. Go to manscaped.com, use the promo code State of Saints, and you will save 20% off of the Lawnmower 4.0 as well as other Manscaped items. That's manscaped.com. Hey, what's going on, Who Dat Nation? It is yours truly, TJ Jones, the host of the State of the Saints podcast. And I have a special guest with me here on the State of the Saints podcast. I have NFL writer and also from the NFL Network. And some of you know him from his podcast alongside Steve Weiss entitled Huddle and Flow. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jim Trotter. Jim, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for your time. I know we just talked off air. You're just right off the air from the NFL Network. So thank you so much for taking a few moments just to talk to us a little bit about Saints football. But first off, the Huddle and Flow podcast, I mean, it's really taken off, Jim. And I mean, you have so many great guests. I mean, you guys touch on a lot of subjects that, in my opinion, a lot of people in media don't really like to touch on. My first question for you is, like, how did it all get started? What was the thought behind the Huddle and Flow podcast?
You know, it's really just what you said, to be able to touch on issues that other people aren't touching on that are important to our community. You know, Steve and I both graduated from Howard University, as did our producer, Thomas Warren. And so when I joined the network in 2018, we went to the network about doing a podcast, and we said we wanted it to be sort of Afrocentric. We wanted it to be issues that relate to our community, to things that we went through growing up, to things that we see now. And no one said no, but no one said yes either. And so for 2 years, it just sat on a vine, and I like to say really died on a vine. Right. And then we had the summer of George Floyd, where, you know, all of a sudden, all of these different organizations and companies are trying to be more empathetic and at least open-minded to people of color. And so they came to us and said, hey, remember that podcast you guys talked about? Are you still interested? And we said yes. And we said, as long as we control who is on, that there's no filter in terms of what we talk about and all those things. And we've tried to be true to that as best we can.
Yeah, and we appreciate it. I mean, you all have some really great guests on the show. Two guests in particular close to the New Orleans Saints organization would be that head coach Sean Payton and also Jameis Winston. But we thank you for your work, you and Steve. You just mentioned you two were Howard University graduates, HBCU. I'm a proud graduate of HBCU as well, Jackson State University. And that's another question I wanted to ask you, HBCU athletes. We had a draft a couple of weeks ago, and there were no HBCU athletes drafted in the 2021 draft. I want to get your thoughts on that. Head coach of Jackson State University, Deion Sanders. I mean, I know he was talking about like he doesn't want this type of thing to ever happen again, not on his watch, and really took it upon himself to really be the catalyst to try to change HBCU football and what people think about it. So what are your thoughts on HBCU players not being drafted, and what are some things we have to do to make sure that this does not happen again?
Well, I think first and foremost, you have to look at the last few drafts, and there's been a downward trend in terms of the numbers of HBCU players being drafted. And I'm doing this off the top of my head, so my numbers might not be exactly right. But I believe over the last 3 drafts, you could count the number of HBCU players drafted on one hand. Right. And it includes this year where there were none. Also complicating matters this year, as you know, was COVID. And you had some programs that didn't play, and you had some that only played, a small number of games. And that's not to take these teams off the hook, but it is a factor where first of all, you're not allocating the large percentage of your resources to these schools anyway. And now you have less data and information and tape to go on. So look, the reality is, I think as Deion said it best, he said, I coached against these men this year. I know there are men here who can play in the NFL. And I believe him. And I think what teams do is that sometimes it's strategic on their part, where they say they feel some of these HBCU players won't be drafted because of where they played, and therefore we can get them during the free agency period. We have a better shot of going out and choosing who we wanted. No one knows who we want, and we pay them, and we can do better that way. But getting back to the heart of your question, it's ridiculous, to me, that none were drafted. I'm sorry, as a product of an HBCU, as someone who knows the history of HBCUs, particularly as it relates to football, you can't tell me there aren't guys out there who can play in the NFL.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I look at the NFL landscape, and I've seen players, especially like, during this podcast, focusing on the Saints. I've seen New Orleans Saints get guys that were, late in rounds that come from schools that you probably wouldn't hear every single day. So with that, I feel like they did do their due diligence. And my question is, if you're doing your due diligence, why can't you do your due diligence at a Jackson State or Howard University or, Alabama A&M? There's some really great talented players out there. And I just feel like it's a shame that, they don't get the opportunities. And I think if they were to get those opportunities, the world would actually see how great and how talented those guys really are.
This is such a multi-layer subject, and I think number one, so many things come into play. And you also have, potentially implicit bias where, you may have some scouts who just in their own thinking think that HBCU football is inferior to the PWIs. So you might be dealing with that right up front. The other thing is, scouts and teams have to make a judgment on not how good you were in college, but whether or not that skill set translates to the NFL in terms of what they do. And again, this goes back to bias potentially, where if number one, you think that the level of competition is inferior, and now you're being asked to stand on a table for a player who's coming from a conference that you believe is inferior, and I'm not saying that it is, but you believe that, then obviously you're not going to fight as hard for those players. And I think that some of that goes on. It's human nature. I don't think anyone will say it publicly, but I think that there is some truth to that. But again, you can't tell me that there are not players at these HBCU schools right now who can make an NFL roster and in some cases have an impact. I just refuse to accept it.
And I do as well. I understand that it's a tough business. The NFL is a tough business. People want to make sure that they make their splash, and they want to stay in their positions as long as they possibly can. And some of them feel like the best way to do that is that they don't toe the line, so to speak. But I feel like, stepping outside of your comfort zone from time to time might benefit you. And like I said, I just think that those players are extremely talented. Look, you can't tell me Tariq Cohen is the only HBCU player that you can find in the draft a couple of years ago. You can't tell me that Darius Leonard, who's an all-pro, is the only person that you can find. Or Teron Armstead, who's also an All-Pro.
Right.
You can't tell me that these are the only guys that you can find. And what makes these guys any different to believe that these are the only guys that can translate to the pros? Jim, it's kind of hard for me to accept.
No, it should be hard for you to accept, and you shouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't accept it.
Yeah.
I do think having Deion at Jackson State, having Eddie George now at Tennessee State, and I think you're going to see some other players go back to the HBCU ranks to be head coaches, is only going to bring visibility and more scouts to those schools, those programs, those games. And I think that is going to help turn this around to somewhat. I mean, is there going to be all of a sudden a great flow of players from HBCUs to the NFL? No, we know that's not going to work that way. Yeah. But just the fact that Deion and others are bringing visibility to these schools and these programs. And again, as I say, I talked to one former NFL All-Pro who was approached about coaching an HBCU and said he couldn't do it this year, but maybe next year. I think you're going to see more of them. And as that happens, again, I think you'll see more players from HBCUs in the NFL, or at least getting opportunities. Because I think that's the thing here. Mm-hmm. People always forget when we talk about these sorts of things. No one is asking for a handout here. All these players are asking for is an opportunity to prove themselves, just like anyone else. And it's the same whether it relates to head coaches in the NFL or general managers in the NFL, whatever. No one is asking you to give them anything. All they're asking for is an opportunity to prove themselves. And I think if they get the opportunity to prove themselves, they will. Yeah.
And I believe so. And hopefully, like I said, change does take place. And especially, I'm a little biased with this at Jackson State, with Deion Sanders, but also like his success at Jackson State can kind of, trickle off into other universities, and these guys actually get these opportunities because I just think that it's time. I just want everybody to get, a fair shake, and to me, they have not. But let me go ahead and move on. Let's talk.
But I'll say this too. But I'll say this too. One of the things that's important, as you were just talking about with Huddle and Flow, is that you're keeping a spotlight on it and you're talking about it. Because the easy thing to do is just be frustrated or angry and then just move on, ignore it. But as long as you talk about it, and for me, I say it's important to talk about it, trying to take some of the emotion out of it. Because when you get emotional, people a lot of times, unless they agree with what you say, will just tune you out. Yeah. So you can try and be reasoned in the discussion and bring up points that aren't necessarily just emotional. I think you have a better chance. And so for you to keep bringing it up or to focus on it and want to have a discussion about it, it's only going to help. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's what it's all about. I think it's about communicating. And I hope, that people can, set aside their, some of their feelings. Like some of the feelings that we have, we're so emotional about them. We don't try to see other people's point of view. Right. I feel like if we sit down and we just completely unmask ourselves and listen to one another, I think we can find a common ground. In this particular situation, like you said, Jim, it's not like they're asking for a handout. It's not like they're asking you to give them something. They want the opportunity to show you that they have just as much value as these guys at these power conferences. And if you give them the opportunity, you're not going to regret it. And I believe that you won't regret it if you give them the opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but we'll move back. Let's talk a little bit about the NFL now. You had two members of the Saints. Coach Sean Payton was on the Huddle and Flow podcast, also Jameis Winston. I want to start with Sean Payton. This is the first year in 15 years he won't be without his all-time leader in passing and all type of other statistics when it comes to the quarterback position. Drew Brees, I know you've been out there in San Diego. I know you've seen your fair share of Drew Brees throughout his career. Yeah. But now, he moves forward, and now we have Taysom Hill, who's been with the New Orleans Saints for about 4 or 5 years now. And we have Jameis Winston, who's going into his second year as a New Orleans Saints quarterback. Just judging on the conversation that you had with Sean Payton, what do you see him leaning towards mostly? Do you see him mostly focusing in on maybe Jameis Winston being a starter or possibly Taysom Hill?
I think it's going to be an open competition. I think Sean is being honest about that. He's going to give them both an opportunity to compete and see what happens. The thing I love about Sean and his coaching staff is that I go back to 2 years ago when Drew was out and Teddy Bridgewater had to start, and they were playing Seattle, and it was in the Superdome. And I remember I was there, and then we're in the press room after, and Sean comes in, and the Saints had just won, and Sean's looking kind of down, and I'm like, man, what's going on here? And all of a sudden, he pulls back the curtains, and he's being honest, and he says, I didn't do a good job. Like, what do you mean you didn't do a good job? I didn't do a good job in terms of tailoring our game plan to Teddy Bridgewater. Mm-hmm. I can't call the same game with Teddy in there that I call with Drew in there. And I have to play to Teddy's strengths. Mm-hmm. And so he did that. And Teddy went 5-0 that year, as you know. And the next year when Drew goes down again, now Taysom Hill is in there as a starter. And the thing that I love is that you saw where Sean took the offense and said, okay, I've got to fit it to Taysom's skill set. And the first 2 games, they attempted very few, relatively speaking, passes. It was very run heavy. And then over the last couple or whatever, then they opened the offense up a little bit. And they if memory serves me right, finished 3-1 with Taysom as the starter last year. So what that says to me is, number one, regardless of whether it's Taysom or it's Jameis, Sean is going to fit the offense to the skill set of whoever is behind center. The thing that gave me and gave Steve a clear understanding of where the Saints were going this offseason is where Sean said, in talking about quarterbacks for 2021, that he's probably already on our roster. Meaning it was Taysom or Jameis. So we knew right there, knowing that Jameis on a 1-year deal, they were going to bring Jameis back, barring some team just completely, opening up its financial coffers for Jameis, which you didn't see happening because you didn't see it happening the year before. Now, having said all of that, here's how I believe this is going to play out. I believe Jameis is going to be the starter. And I believe that Taysom will continue to fill the role that he does from this standpoint. Think about this: if Taysom is your starter, now that threat, that versatility that you have with Taysom in terms of whether it's running, whether it's blocking, whether it's H-back, tight end, you don't have that now. Right. So your offense is not as diverse. Right. So for me, now I look at Jameis and I say, okay, he threw 30 touchdowns 2 years ago. Now he had 30 interceptions, which obviously is insane. But when you talk to Jameis about it and you listen to his mindset behind why that happened and how he has learned from it, I do believe he's going to be a better quarterback. Having been able to sit the bench for a year, to study Drew Brees. Look, Jameis Winston right now thinks he's Drew Brees. I mean, that's the reality in terms of how he studied Drew, what he learned from Drew. And now in the offseason, he's training with Drew's trainer, and he's doing many of the things that Drew did. Even Jameis coming out here to San Diego to work with Drew's trainer, because Drew has a home out here in the offseason. This is where he and his family would come. So the one thing I took from Jameis that was so important that he learned from Drew, he said there was a game where the Saints were behind in the fourth quarter and the final 2 minutes. And in his head, he's thinking, man, we got to push the ball downfield. We got to go deep. We got to hurry up. We got to score. And he's watching Drew, and Drew is just going methodically down the field. And so when Jameis asked him about it, Drew told him, don't be results-oriented, be decision-oriented, meaning you continue to run the offense. You continue to take what the defense is giving you, because when you force it, that's usually when bad things happen. And for Jameis, that's what he found out in Tampa. He's got the reputation of being a gunslinger, of being a guy who's going to push it down the field. And so whenever Tampa got in those situations where they needed a quick score or whatever, he's trying to get the big play every time instead of being decision-oriented and taking what the defense is giving him and moving the ball down the field that way. I believe that's going to be in the back of his mind. As he says, he used to think of game manager as a bad description, a bad title. He now believes it's a positive. Now, is he just blowing smoke up my rear end? It's possible. But we're going to find out. But I believe that he has learned. And I believe this. If he hasn't, Sean Payton will get him up out of there.
Yeah. I mean, it's a 1-year deal that they're dealing with right now. I mean, so this is a, prove-it deal for Jameis Winston. And not only here in New Orleans, for the Saints. It's other places as well, because trust and believe, if he goes out there and he flops, other teams are going to be like, I don't know about that. But if he goes out there and he plays well, I mean, he'll put himself in a position to be able to maximize on what he done this past season.
I'm gonna tell you this right now. He is not gonna flop.
Yeah, I believe that too.
Now, he might not be all pro, but he is not gonna flop.
Yeah.
I believe he's gonna have a very successful season. I really do.
I believe that too, because you mentioned it when you were talking about with Teddy Bridgewater. When Sean Payton realized that, okay, I need to play to Teddy's strengths, right? He went out there and he devised a game plan to fit his strengths. I look at Jameis Winston out in Tampa, right? Bruce Arians, I mean, I like him a lot, but it seems like he really trusts his system and he doesn't like to shy away from what he's doing. So I think a lot of those times where Jameis was pushing the ball down the field, it was something that Bruce Arians kind of wanted him to do and wanted him to be. And you look at even with Tom Brady at the beginning of the season, when he was running a Tampa offense, it was the same way. But then when, I guess after that bye week and they started like implement things were a little bit more Tom Brady friendly, they started to get different results. So I feel like Sean Payton is going to, sit down with Jameis and say, see what Jameis does well and going to make an offensive scheme around him. And I think that people are going to see the best of Jameis Winston based on it. I don't think that Sean is going to put him in positions where he can throw 30 interceptions. I don't see that happening. I mean, a lot of things that the Saints do offensively, I didn't see Tampa do when Jameis was there. Didn't have a good offensive line, didn't have a really adequate running game, had talented receivers, but that was about it. So I really feel like they're putting things in place that are going to make him succeed as a quarterback. And I guess my question is to you, like, you had opportunity, you and Steve had opportunity to interview him and talk to him. Do you all hear and see a different Jameis Winston than you probably would have seen a couple years ago? Do you believe in what you saw in that interview?
Yeah, look, the reality is you get older, you get wiser. And if you don't, you're going to have problems. Yeah. And I believe that Jameis is older. I believe he's wiser. He talks about his faith now, being more into the Bible. He's a family man now, having a young one. All of those things come into play. People mature at different rates. And I do believe that Jameis has grown up. I do believe that when you watch these tapes of him out here training and whatnot, I mean, he's putting in the time. Right. And that was never an issue. I mean, I never, ever, even in Tampa, heard anyone say, well, he doesn't work hard or whatever. He's always worked hard. Mm. He just at times was his own worst enemy when it came to decision-making on the field in terms of ball security. So, yes, I believe that Jameis has matured. I believe he's a different player than he was 2 years ago, which he should be. And I believe that under Sean Payton and Pete Carmichael and that staff, that he's going to do really well, barring injuries. As long as he has his complement of players, I believe he's going to do really well. I really do. And for all these people who want to talk or believe that maybe this is the demise of the Saints with Drew gone, look, the reality is that offense was not as diverse as it could be with Drew, because Drew had physical limitations a year ago that came out after the season, where he talked about the injuries that he was playing with and how he's unable to push the ball down the field. With Jameis, you're going to be able to do it all. You can push it down the field. You can do the intermediate stuff. You can do the short stuff. And you've got one of the best running backs in the game behind you. So I believe, and I could be wrong, but I believe that Jameis Winston is going to have a very good year.
Do you think he can lead the Saints to the playoffs?
Yes.
Okay. Final question for you. Like I said, you're out there in San Diego. You had opportunity to watch Drew Brees throughout his career. What did Drew Brees mean to you, as a writer and also just as a viewer of the NFL? What did he bring to the NFL, and what should fans remember about Drew Brees?
I'll say this to you. And I've said this before, and I mean this. Drew Brees may be the most singularly focused player that I personally have covered. So what do I mean by that? this was someone who was going to get every bit of potential out of his body and his game that he could get, regardless of what it took to get it. He was firmly committed to doing that. So I remember after Drew comes in 2001, he sits the bench behind Doug Flutie. He gets a cameo for like a half against the Kansas City Chiefs and just lights it up. Looks amazing. The next year, they name him the starter. He plays pretty well. The next year, he doesn't play well at all. He gets benched several times by Marty Schottenheimer and that staff. And during that process, I got to see the competitive nature of Drew too. I don't know that I've told this story before, but he gets benched in Pittsburgh. And we go back to the locker room. And of course, that's the story. So I go over to his dressing stall, and you can tell he's intense. He's trying not to look at me, and he's trying to put his stuff in his bag and this. And he's like, let me shower first. I'm like, all right. So anyway, I go talk to Marty Schottenheimer. And I don't remember if it was right there or the next day or whatever, where Marty tells me that Drew kind of jammed him up after and was like, why did you take me out, et cetera, whatever. And coming at him in a way where Marty says he had to tell him at one point, young man, you realize who you're talking to. And Drew dialed it back a little bit. So we get to another game, and they're playing the Bears. And Drew doesn't play particularly well. And late in that game, Marty switches to Doug Flutie. So we go in the locker room, and we're waiting around until the end, all the players. Nobody really wants to touch the subject of who should be starting a quarterback. So go to Marcellus Wiley, who's like the last guy in the locker room. And Marcellus is like, okay, I know why you're here. And he's like, basically, bump it. I'm going to give you what you want. Doug Flutie should be starting. And he goes on and talks about why. So the next day, we have open locker room. And I don't remember if we saw Drew in the locker room during that period. But anyway, when the period is over and we're leaving and we're all walking back to the media center, I turn and I look in the weight room, the door's open. And I see Drew with Marcellus like jammed up. Where like Drew's right in his face. And so I call Marcellus and I'm like, what was that all about? And Marcellus said, man, he wanted to know who felt the same way I did. He wanted to know who felt that Doug should be starting and this is his team. And I'm like, wow, because we talking about Marcellus 6'5", 260 something, whatever. And you got Drew, who maybe 6 foot, 170 pounds, dripping wet or something. I don't know. But you saw that competitive, that competitor in him. And so that offseason, they make the draft day trade to get Phillip Rivers. And I'm like, oh man, what's this mean for Drew? Well, I gotta go find out. Right. So that Monday morning, I go down to the facility, which is closed. I wait out in the parking lot, and Drew comes in, and I see him through the fence, and he says, just meet me inside. And I go inside, and I'm like, okay, this is going to be awkward. And I said, hey, I got to ask you. And Drew said, I'll never forget, he said to me, this is my team. We're going to the playoffs, and I'm going to the Pro Bowl. Now, mind you, they hadn't been to the playoffs, I think, in 8 years. Hadn't had a winning record in 8 years. He said, this is my team. We're going to the playoffs. I'm going to the Pro Bowl. Fast forward to the announcement of the Pro Bowl teams. Drew Brees is on that squad. And the Chargers are going to the playoffs. So I see him in the locker room the day the Pro Bowl team is announced. I stopped him. I said, hey, you remember that conversation we had after the draft? And he said, yeah. And I said, the one where you told me is your team. You guys are going to the playoffs and you're going to the Pro Bowl? And he said, yeah. I said, I thought you were delusional, right? And he kind of gave me that sly smile, and he goes, I know. And then he just went on about his way. That's true, man. He is the most competitive dude I think that I probably ever covered, one of them. But the fact that he would hire a mental coach, the fact that he would hire a personal trainer, the fact that he would do things that others didn't do simply to try and push the limits in terms of he would go out in like 7-on-7 and close his eyes, throw passes with his eyes shut.
Wow.
Because he simply wanted to feel where the ball should go. That if he saw what he saw, he knows where the hole is going to be in the defense. Now, can he drop back with his eyes shut and release the ball, trusting that what he has seen is actually going to come to fruition? And it blew teammates' minds because at first they didn't see it, and then there were a couple of times they're like, did he do what we think he did? And then we ask after practice and it's like, yeah, he did. He was going to push the boundary. And that's why I have so much respect for him as a player that he simply was never going to accept failure. He just wasn't. That's how he was wired. And, I wish he would have gotten one more Super Bowl. Yeah. It's unfortunate they got hit with the Minneapolis Miracle and the botch call by the official in the Rams game. But
don't remind me.
I know, but he's truly one of the special ones.
Yeah. Yeah, he definitely is. And I mean, I appreciate the story that you told. I mean, but he means so much to the city of New Orleans. I'm out in Myrtle Beach right now, but I was born and raised in New Orleans, and I grew up during a time when the Saints were horrible. You can exactly. You can go to the gas station and get Saints tickets. You can get 8. You can get 8 on 10 and get yourself 2 tickets to the game. Yeah, and he actually changed the narrative about what people think about Saints football. And you have a lot of young kids that probably was growing up like 8, 9, and 10, probably don't even remember how bad the Saints were because of this guy. And he means a lot to the city of New Orleans, Saints fans all over. And Jim, I appreciate you telling that story and telling us about the competitor that he is.
I'm going to say this to you, too. I know Drew's a man of faith, too. And I do believe that there was something in terms of destiny because he really wanted to go to Miami.
Yeah.
When he was a free agent, remember, he had torn his labrum in his shoulder last game in San Diego, wasn't fully healthy when free agency rolled around.
Right.
The Dolphins were too scared medically to sign him. And that's where he wanted to go. Yeah. And I do believe that there was some power that said, no, you belong in New Orleans. Yeah. After Katrina and everything else that's gone on, you belong here. And the commissioner at that time stepping in and saying that the Bensons couldn't move the team to San Antonio, that there is something you're needed here.
Yeah.
And I want to say this too. We need to give some credit to his wife.
Yeah.
Because I remember there were times I had to write some pretty critical things of Drew out in San Diego on his play. And that just comes with the business. When you're not playing well, you're being benched, all of that. Right. And so you never know how a guy is going to react.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times when you write those critical stories, they're going to blow you off. They got nothing to say. I never forget one time his wife said during one of these periods and said to him, no, you're going to talk to him. And, and we had the conversation. And that wasn't the first time she had done something like that. She had done it, I think, with someone else as well. But for him to be as great as he is and to make the sacrifices that he made, somebody had to be taking care of the home.
Yeah.
And be willing to, accept that there were going to be sacrifices. And that's why I say that Brittany Breeze deserves her flowers as well as Drew at this moment.
Yeah, definitely. When we think about some of these great players, I don't think a lot of people think of the people behind the scenes that's helping those individuals be great. They have 4 kids together. I mean, he has to stay focused, stay dialed in, got to get prepared. And pretty sure there's nights you have to stay up in order to go over game concepts and being away from the family. Somebody has to take care of home and keep everything together. So Brittany Breeze, I mean, she definitely deserves all the credit in the world and for what she's done. I mean, also even in a community, state of Louisiana, I mean, she's really ingrained into the fabric of Louisiana. I mean, from, doing nonprofit organization work, donating money all across Louisiana. We appreciate everything she does. No doubt about that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Jim, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a part of the State of the Saints podcast. And We look forward to seeing you on the NFL Network and also hearing the Huddle and Flow podcast. And just let everybody know how they can find the Huddle and Flow podcast as well as get in touch with you.
Yeah, it's we're on a break right now, so I'm not sure when it'll be starting back up. But we're on Apple, we're on Spotify, but also the NFL just partnered with iHeartRadio in terms of its podcast platform, so it'll be found there once it resumes. And then I'm just on social media, Jim Trotter _NFL, and really that's it, man. I'm not a big social media creature, all of that. I just try and do what I do and keep it moving.
Yeah. I appreciate it once again being here on the State of the Saints podcast. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing and seeing you, sir.
All right. I appreciate you having me, man.
All right. You take care.